Tell me, which of these statements apply to you? You have a great need for other people to like and admire you. You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. You have a great deal of unused capacity which you have not turned to your advantage. Some of your aspirations tend to be pretty unrealistic. Security is one of your major goals in life. These are just 5 of the 13 statements that psychologist Bertram Forer presented to his psychology students in 1949. He told them that the list had been individually created for each of them and that they came from a diagnostic personality databank called the Diagnostic Interest Blank. But this databank didn't exist. It was fake. In truth, Forer came up with this list of 13 so-called personality traits by pulling them from a newsstand astrology book. That's right, they were randomly chosen, one from each horoscope sign. And every participant in the study received the exact same 13 items in what Forer termed a personality sketch. They were asked to rate the accuracy of each statement. In a test with 13 random statements, the law of averages suggests that participants would agree with about half of the statements, or 6.5 true statements for each participant. But that's not what happened here. The average result was closer to 11. Even more remarkable was the fact that all participants believed that this set of items was diagnostic, meaning that it was possible to learn something about themselves from this kind of sketch. They also believed that the tests had been reasonably accurate and their personalities had in fact been revealed. Except, as I mentioned, the set of items was not a diagnostic test, nor was it a personality test. So what led participants to believe the results so strongly? Well, it's related to their level of gullibility, being too willing to trust others or be persuaded to believe that something is true. And also because of a psychological concept called self-validation. This is a mental operation that we all rely on to recognize or validate our self-worth. It includes accepting things about our internal experience, like our thoughts and feelings, rather than external experience. Self-validation is one way we justify we matter and the things we do matter. All human beings have biased minds. So any justification or validation that comes from our own minds should be considered a tad suspect. It's an innate part of how our brains work, but when the forces of self-validation and gullibility combine, you get the bias we'll be discussing in this lecture. Forer's work in the field has led some researchers to call this bias the Forer effect. Other researchers call it the Barnum effect. Yep, that Barnum, P.T. Barnum, the circus promoter and showman. He's famous for saying, "There's a sucker born every minute." And though there's no evidence he ever said it, it's often attributed to him. Psychologist Paul Meehl coined this bias the Barnum effect because it appears when we hear a statement that could be true of anyone. Let's look at one of the items from Forer's experiment. You have a great need for other people to like and admire you. This seems broad. Of course, most people want to be liked and admired. It's vague, and that's the point. How do you get a single statement to apply to as many people as possible? You make it so vague that everyone says to themselves, "Oh yeah, that sounds like me." These statements are referred to as Barnum statements because Barnum knew how to draw crowds to his shows by using broad and generalizable statements that people would interpret in their own way. And this led them to participate in and pay for whatever show or product he was promoting. And this is where the idea of self-validation comes in. Perhaps the fake diagnostic personality test you got a peek of was just self-validating. It indicated aspects of your personality, didn't it? And when you're validated in this way, it may give you a small boost to your self-esteem. And it's natural to want to feel good about yourself. However, this bias and the effects of self-validation from positively worded statements like the one I just shared can combine, and that gets us into trouble. Fortune tellers, astrologers, and mediums often try to make money by simply telling you Barnum statements and hoping you'll agree that they apply to you. They'll likely use those same statements on the client who comes in after you. Okay, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. Maybe you went to a fortune teller as a dare or as a goof. Maybe you found it entertaining and you were happy to pay for the fun of the experience. No harm, no foul. But what if I told you that this psychic services industry is a $2 billion one in the US alone? That seems like a lot of money for self-validation or dares. The monetary stakes can be high. Elizabeth Holmes received millions of dollars in startup capital for the health technology company Theranos. She stated that her new technology could revolutionize blood testing with a single finger prick. Here's what she said, and see if you can spot the vagueness. We've created these little tiny tubes, which we call the nanotainers, which are designed to replace the big traditional tubes that come from your arm, and instead allow for all the testing to be done from a tiny drop from a finger. There are a couple of Barnum statements ideas present in that quote. First, what exactly are nanotainers? It's like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, just putting the word quantum in front of anything to make it sound really cool. I imagine these small tubes aren't actually nano-sized. Another Barnum aspect to this quote includes the tiny drop from a finger. It's vague. How does all this information come from a tiny drop of blood? And in the end, it was discovered that there was very little truth to her claims, and she was indicted in 2018 for defrauding investors because the blood tests were found to be problematic and unable to perform what was promised to those investors. Ultimately, she was found guilty of this fraud on January 4th, 2022. One of the major cases prosecutors made against her was that she specifically targeted powerful donors, like former high-ranking government officials and retail executives. Barnum's statements can be used to swindle folks out of money, but they can also be used to gain power, status, favors, or prestige. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle got married in 2018, an American named Thomas Muscatello convinced several news outlets he was a son of Kent, England, and a British royal expert. He even appeared on the broadcast of their wedding. Muscatello threw on a stereotypical British accent, spoke about riding horses in the Kent countryside, and asked an elderly couple to pose as his grandparents. Even his fake last name, Mace Archer Mills, is an amalgamation of names that seem generally British. Shortly after his appearances on the wedding broadcasts, the Wall Street Journal completed a background investigation of Mr. Muscatello, determining that his actual past didn't align with his stated past. He has since retreated from public life. How do people like Holmes and Muscatello manage to fool so many people for so long? Psychologist Ray Hyman defines some of the techniques that con artists and hucksters rely on to get you to do what they want. Compliance, perhaps without even realizing it's happening. The first thing con artists have is an air of confidence. All they have to do is believe what they're doing is real, and people will trust and believe them. Next, they'll use charts and figures to make you think that whatever they're pitching is more reputable than you might think. They might also employ some sort of gimmick. For example, a financial con man might tell you that they use a proprietary algorithm to figure out how to invest your money. A psychic might read your palm or use a crystal ball. They'll even make sure to know what you're wearing and reference that in their shtick, such as commenting on a woman's earrings or a man's suit. Anything to make you feel like the most important person in the world at that moment. Finally, to achieve that importance, they'll use flattery. This is one of the older social influence tricks. I'm sorry to say this, but if someone is flattering you, you might want to think twice about whether they want something from you or not. Con artists need you to actively go along with their schemes, so flattery is a perfect technique. All the rest of the stuff I mentioned is extra flair because flattery gets your foot in the door most of the time. But all of that is, like I said, meant to make you feel important, validated. Of course, you might think you're important, and so this con artist or huckster is attempting to highlight that by validating you. Oops, there's that word again. You might think, I'll never get duped. But these biases and effects are extremely common and often far more subtle than the examples I've shared so far. Several replications of Foer's experiment have yielded similar results. There was even a replication where the items I mentioned at the top of this lecture were changed to fit organizations rather than individuals. So instead of you have a great need for other people to like and admire you, it was your company has a great need to develop positive brand awareness. Participants in this study were leaders of companies, over 800 of them, each answering for their own company. And they showed the same bias that Foer found in his students. That is, these company leaders, the participants, anthropomorphized, gave human qualities to their companies while evaluating the sketch, and they agreed with that sketch overwhelmingly. In other words, the participants made their companies human-like in their own minds and without prompting. And so the personality sketch seems just like a person. The results are similar then to what Foer found decades before.